Hello, everybody. Welcome to KeyFrames Forgotten, a podcast where we take a look at anime that the general public has kind of left behind, and we talk about why that might be and whether or not we think they deserve a second look. My name is Jean-Michel Aumann.
And I'm Julian Malaman.
And today we are looking at an older production, IG production. Say that 5 times fast. This is Windy Tales.
Yeah. In
Which
Japanese, Fujin Monogatari.
okay,
Which
I'm
means
glad you
it's
came.
set.
I'm glad you came in with the Japanese title because I realized that I forgot to pull it up.
Yeah, it just means basically the same thing.
Yeah,
It's
you
like
know,
it's a one-to-one translation. Well,
more or less,
almost
yeah.
one-to-one.
But so this one is an interesting series. This is an iyashikei. Would you say? Would you say it fits in that
Kinda,
genre?
yeah, like broadly in that area of the slice of life genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if people don't know, an iyashikei is sort of kind of a tone genre. The term sometimes used is ambient television, where
Yeah.
it serves sort of a healing or contemplative
Hmm.
function rather
Yeah.
than more traditional narrative stuff.
It's literally, I think, healing style or healing mode, if you will.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, genre. Like
Yes.
K is a vague. It means a couple of different
Yeah.
things.
And the most well known example of the genre I think is probably the Aria franchise.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
there's been some more recent stuff just this past season. There was Super Cub. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're at all familiar with anything like that, you kind of have an idea of what you're getting into here.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into the details, just real quick, using the ISO standard internet reviewer scale of 1 to 10, but with light, solid, and strong on as gradients on the numbers. What would you give Windy Tales?
I'd give it a light to decent 8 on the Fantano scale.
Yeah, we had a similar discussion about this last night when we finished the series. And I came away saying I would probably give it like a strong 7. So I like it, very slightly, not quite as much as Julian does, but we
Mm.
we both like the show. Like
Yes. Yes.
this is if you're into Iyashikei and I mean you guys can see we've got the poster pulled up. If you're into this interesting art style that it's got, which we'll get into a little bit more about that in a minute,
Mm.
you should watch this. It's a good
Mm-hmm.
time.
It's definitely it's if you are okay with slow, reserved, low concept shows that, and this is going to sound so pretentious and North American, but things that are not especially anime but are extremely Japanese,
Yeah,
then you will probably like this. I
yeah,
mean, very few people I have encountered who have seen Windy Tales have disliked it,
yeah.
even if it's not everyone's cup of tea.
Yeah,
It,
and we can
yeah.
dive into this a little more when we get to the review segments towards the end of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
But like the people I have spoken to who have seen Windy Tales seem to largely regard it positively, if not necessarily rapturously. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it has a good reputation to the extent that it has one, but it is
Mm-hmm.
definitely it flies a little under the radar compared to something like Flying Witch, which is another Iyashikei series that is more recent, and I think people remember that one a bit better. Um, and I do get why, because like you said, it's very Japanese, and what we mean when we say that, at least in this particular instance, is that there are aspects of the show that kind of seem to draw from almost more of a Japanese literary tradition rather than
Mm-hmm.
other animation. Um,
There's a lot of stuff about storytelling and poetry in the text,
mm-hmm.
but also that the cadence of the show, like the way that it part of it has to do with just the presentation is like it adopts kind of a this very striking abstract art style that when that like so it kind of seamlessly moves in and out of visual metaphor in a
Yeah,
way that is like there's it's not it doesn't necessarily make a show of very
yeah,
dramatic things.
it's very subtle, which is
Yeah.
interesting. But before we go, like
Mhm.
full headlong into the feel of the show, we should probably explain what it's about. Do you wanna take care of that? Because I feel like you've got a real solid grasp on the mechanics of Windy Tale.
So it kind of begins the sort of inciting incident is um that now the main character who
Who is in the
is
center here?
yeah, she is one of only two members of the digital photography club at her school,
Mm-hmm.
which sort of replaced the old photography club, and she basically does nothing but take pictures of clouds.
Yeah,
And so she's hanging out on the school roof and she sees a flying cat.
she does
And
see a flying cat. Yes.
and at one point, basically in order to approach it, she winds up falling off the roof and then is suspended in air.
mm-hmm.
And then she realizes that it was through the sort of intervention of a young teacher of hers, Taiki.
Mm-hmm.
Taiki Sensei, it turns out, is from a small village outside of the small city that they're in, like way out in the sticks, where there's a sort of like a clan of people who control the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And her friend Miki, who's also in the photography club, um, Miki's like friend who has a huge crush on her, boy named Jun, and
Mm-hmm.
Ryoko, who feeds the wind cat and has known about this for a while, and like and is kind of we'll get into her later. She's
Mm-hmm.
very witchy.
Yes.
Um, uh, like
I like Ryoko a lot, but yeah, go on.
they wind up getting brought into this whole weird situation. Like Ryoko does not go with them to the village to, you know, uh, meet Taiki's people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but she does have she is from dealing with the Wind Cat has picked up some of these powers, and so do Nao and Miki. June is not good at them, so he
Yes,
doesn't. He
June is sort of the least important of our leads, but
he but
he's important in other ways. Yeah, we'll
he
get
has
to that.
he has charm. He is a good boy. He's
He
a
is
good
the
guy.
good boy.
Yes. Especially in the flying squirrel episode, we'll get to that later. So much we'll get to that later. But the thing is, partly it's because this show is, despite the fact that there's the very obvious, sort of like contemporary fantasy element, like low fantasy, you'd almost call it.
Yeah,
Uh,
or
it's
or almost like magical realist.
yeah, kind of on the borderline of that,
Yeah,
because it's like the magic isn't entirely taken for granted. Like it's a little bit weird, and that's discussed at a
yeah,
few points. But it's still kind of like it's just like the whole world is
yeah.
subtly infused with
It
magic. It's just that
is.
people don't notice
Yeah,
it.
like the distinction I would draw between this and if you took this conceit and applied it to like a more action-ish series, you'd get like a certain magical index or something, which is very far away from what this is doing.
Oh yeah, it's an
It's
extremely different kind of show.
yeah, it's very subtle, very low key, very character driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was about to say it's about these handful of middle schoolers who are sort of just, they come upon something magical that is interwoven into the world, and so it's kind of like just them doing stuff that is to greater and lesser extents connected to that.
Yeah, like the distinction I would draw is that the magic enables the plots sometimes, but it's not the focus of them really, except for one early on. Which, if we want to talk about that like right out the gate, I guess we can.
Okay,
The first two episodes and that village plot, which culminates in kind of the only like, I don't want to say the only dramatic moment in the entire series, but definitely like the most direct that it gets with its whole core thesis, which we can kind of explain that as we go along.
Well, I do think that the core theme in the flower viewing episode,
that too,
is the other point where like and arguably the one in this school nurse's office, the storytelling episode, but like like in the second episode, there is an older man who helps teach them, wind things, and he's like this blustery old guy, but he's very charming, and in a ritual that they perform each year, to like sort of handle the weather, like to try to ward off terrible storms and things, he dies.
Yes. It is the only moment in the show where anything like that happens.
It's definitely the like, it is maybe like the heaviest moment, yet it's treated with solemnity, but not like whacking you over the head.
Yeah, it's not. In fact, it's subtle enough that the first time we watched it, I almost missed it. Like he's there, and then there's the ritual scene where they're all like beating at the wind, and then he's not, and it kind of it took me a second to like put two and two together, like, oh hey, that man is actually like physically deceased, and that's kind of where it like puts the peg in the ground, and it's like, okay, so the core theme of this series is going to be the transience of all things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's also like further hammered home when you find out that and this is another one where it's really subtle, it's like implied is, so Taiki, there's another character in the village named Yukio, who she was Taiki's brother's wife, who Taiki has held a torch for since they were both really young. And then his brother died, and it's implied in another one of these rituals.
Yeah.
And that, she's never fully recovered from that, and she knows full well that Taiki's in love with her.
Yeah, it's this very complicated, and Taiki and Yukio are not the main characters. They're supporting characters. But there's still this little little miniature, very complex dynamic between them.
Yeah.
Where like she's not over her husband's death. he's still kind of holding feelings for her. She knows that he is, but neither of them want to act on it. It's a
Hmm.
lot. Like the show has a very impressive economy of character. Like
Yeah, it's
that's a
it.
lot to fit between two characters that we don't even really see that much of.
Yeah, like a lot of this is communicated in like 3 minutes when they're alone together in the
Yeah,
second episode.
yeah,
It's like it is. That's the thing about this show is that like when it like really zeroes in on character stuff, it's impressively like subtle because it's like
yeah,
there's stuff going on where it's like it's very real. Is like
yeah.
that
It
like it's not exaggerated. It's just like this.
yeah.
You sit with it.
I don't like doing this thing where I praise the show for having characters that don't feel like anime archetypes, because to me that's kind of like I've always sort of considered that kind of a weird way to frame the compliment. But if you are somebody who wants to watch a show where none of the characters fit any, common like slice of life archetypes, here you go.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
everyone's very
uh,
like everybody's got a very pronounced sense of interiority.
hmm like for example, it's like yeah, like Taiki, his whole thing with being like the sort of cocky young teacher who actually secretly is sort of like running away from his sort of culture's sense of adulthood while
Yeah,
trying to project himself as being older than he is.
yeah, like
And
a more like cosmopolitan kind of adulthood.
yeah, then and that's really sealed like in the last episode, which I don't want to give too much away, but it kind of like it loops back in with the previous stuff with Yukio in an
Yeah,
interesting way. Like one of those all I'm gonna say about the ending is that, like it's an ending where it's a clear ending, but it's also not super conclusive or climactic.
yeah, and we'll talk about that a little more when we get to the why don't people quite remember this one as much segment.
Yeah.
But there are a few things like I occasionally think it's almost too subtle for its own good.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. It's a very
you really got to pay attention, which is not a fault,
yeah,
but
and
it's something to know going in.
it's
Like
also like a lot of the episodes. It is episodically structured, but
yes,
but each of the stories kind of are a lot of them are very circular,
yeah.
very
Do you
elliptical.
uh do you want to talk favorite episodes?
Oh yeah.
I know my favorite episode, and I know you know
The
my favorite episode. So why don't you
oh
go
yeah.
first, and then we'll get to
Okay.
mine.
I so in the so a couple of them.
Yeah,
Um the fifth episode is a school infirmary story,
hmm,
which
a very
is
good
this.
one. Yeah,
So there is a character who he is really a background character, but he kind of takes center stage here. Is there is a teacher who God, what is his name? I'm blanking on this. I actually wrote it down.
yeah.
Makino Sensei.
Okay.
Um Makino Sensei is like he's you know like you think in a way that he's kind of like he doesn't have a lot of concern for like the sort of like things that people expect.
He's a
Like
he's a cool teacher who doesn't
well
play by the rules.
well
Is
it's not
kind of your
even that.
first impression of him.
Well, it's not even that. It's more like that he's just way more he's very honest with his students in that he's like in the initial thing is like that he's just like, okay, this lesson is only going to take like 50 minutes, so like the last like 20 odd minutes of this class, which is like way too long, you can just do whatever. And
Yeah,
it's like, and the nurse chides him for this and is like, she's a recurring character. she's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But she like, and he hides out in the nurse's office
Yeah.
like
And
all the time.
she kind of like needles him, and she's like,
Yeah,
you need to be more responsible, and da 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 da.
and and especially because he's acknowledging it's like that, he said, I've read studies and things that, like, in terms of how much that, like, a middle schooler can actually pay attention to one specific thing for a given time.
Hmm.
It's like we force them to pay attention to stuff for way longer than they need to. And he
Yeah.
also has a thing about telling ghost stories.
Yes, which is the real like
Yeah.
center of the episode. So go
And
on.
And so now it turns out has like a serious is hallucinating fever.
Yes,
And she
she is
winds up
quite
in
sick.
she's very sick and ends up in the nurse's office. And she hears Makino having a conversation with the nurse about, and then with Taiki, who comes in. Um and he talks about how, like, one thing in his exchange with Taiki is he says, like Taiki's like, how many of the stories do you know? And it's like about 150 of them.
Hmm.
And he's like, you can remember that many? And it's like, there's no point in remembering stories if you can't tell them to other people.
Yeah.
And he then sort of talks about having been in, and you don't know whether it's something he read in a novel, because he does talk about like this being described in a novel, but he also, the level of vividness of his
Yeah.
description
It
is very
is.
particular.
Yeah, it's ambiguous
Is
as to whether he's
been to
relaying his
he
own experience and
mhm.
like pretending it's something he
But
read in a book, or if it's the other way around.
yeah, but he's talking about being in Malacca,
Hmm.
in these straits in Malaysia. Like, and he talks about how the architecture has been influenced by hundreds upon hundreds of years of colonial occupations, have made it so that the architecture isn't like anywhere else in the region,
Hmm.
and that it's been a trading post for like 2,000 years. And just being and talking about like walking through the streets there, like, because you can't sleep at night, and drinking, hot cola from a bottle because, it's become heated
Yeah, it's
over
just
time.
that hot out. Yeah.
And then like the sweat dripping down your brow, and then people walking
Yeah.
by, and just, and Nal begins to see it.
Yeah, like
And
and we see it too, which is
yeah,
an
we
important
see
thing to
it too.
note.
Yeah,
Uh
it's
like
inc-
it starts
yeah,
materializing in this like sort of purple uh smoke effect.
purple haze, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, hey. And then like she's having these full on hallucinations,
Yeah,
and like they're starting to sort of intrude into the infirmary. And it
yeah.
I remember when we first watched the episode, I was like, this is really interesting, but I don't know if I entirely understand it. And then you said,
Yeah, it's that, in a way, it's about the fact that, like, that creating a narrative or telling a story is about communicating an experience and sharing in that
yeah,
experience with another person. And that whether or not that experience is direct, whether or not it's quote unquote real, is not necessarily as important as what's kind of underlying it.
yeah. It's a fascinating little idea, and it's one the show comes back to a couple times. But
Mhm.
that episode's probably the most direct it ever gets with it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like it's
yeah,
maybe. And oh yeah, also I forgot is like that they that Nal, because she's delirious, starts
mm,
talking to Taiki about the wind manipulation stuff in front of
yes,
Makino, and Makino just kind of like, rolls with it,
hmm,
but he just like, and she's insisting, no, it's really true, and he's like, sure. And that comes back
yes,
like
it
at
does.
the very end of the series, and it's just like that little, like Makino has like this little light bulb moment, and it's great.
Yeah, it's a really like again like I overuse this phrase, but very good economy of character because like
Mm-hmm.
the teacher is not on screen for that long
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of the show. He's got that one episode. He shows up in the background a few more times, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
like literally that 30 seconds at the end of the show.
Yeah,
But
he's a yeah,
you learn a
but
lot about him in just that short amount of
yeah.
time.
And also it's like that it's like this wonderful sort of portrait of somebody who is just in some ways like a very isolated person but not unhappy about it.
Yeah,
And
he he,
it's a he's the adult characters in the show are really interesting. The middle school characters in the show are really interesting. Karin from the the contest episode is also great.
yeah. You can
Um,
talk about that one, and then we'll talk about
oh
the
yeah,
one that you know is my favorite episode.
yes, that one's great too. I mean, there are a couple really
Yeah,
like actually even the weak episodes of the show, quote unquote, are not bad at all. They're
yeah,
very good.
yeah.
It's just it's just that like some like really stick in your mind, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the one for me. And I think we both agree that the idol contest episode
Yeah,
is
it's a
really
well.
interesting.
It I actually I wasn't totally clear if it was like idols or models who also do singing because the line between those things is very thin. But
Yeah, I mean
they're doing
they refer to it as the idol of the 21st century or something.
yeah I guess it is idol then. Anyway, that
Yeah,
doesn't
but
matter.
regardless.
Uh
Mhm.
yeah they're doing this like middle school at,
Talent scout
yeah,
thing.
basically a talent scout where they have these middle schoolers mail in like headshots of themselves uh to apply for this, you know, idol of the 21st century position. Um and there's two main characters that it centers on, one of whom is Now and the other of whom is Karine, who is the one who is like she, you know, she's in the same grade as everybody else, but she actually like does this kind of thing like
Hmm.
as a sort of a part-time job, which um boy, that's crazy. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
um
It's basically like the way that she talks about it is like definitely it's veering into like almost a full time job because she is constantly auditioning
and
and
yeah, like missing
yeah,
school because of it and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. Um but yeah, no, go on. What was your takeaway from that episode?
I don't know. It's like one thing I did want to bring up with that one, which is kind of interesting, is the use of the weird shifting background of the city,
Yeah.
I which I think it could be a couple of places because this takes place in like southern Kanto, I think.
Yeah.
Like
The
like
show
they
in
say it,
general, yeah.
yeah, they say it a few times. So it might be a part of Tokyo that they wind up in. But
Possibly that would make sense.
it could be like Saitama or something. I'm not quite sure, but like the like use of the skyscrapers
Yeah.
and strange background stuff, which is presumably at least partly influenced by the fact that the guy who storyboarded the episode is, we'll get to him later, but he's the guy behind the weird character designs and a lot of the weird visual stuff.
Hmm.
Storyboarded that one, Masatsugu Arakawa.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Interesting guy. Again, we'll get to it. But like use of that as like in a way a metaphor,
Yeah.
like again with
I
this, yeah,
I took it as like a visual representation of confusion.
yeah, and
Just
also
like yeah.
of becoming one person in a sea of a lot of others while still
Yeah.
feeling separate
Like
from them.
yeah, like I live in Chicago
Hmm.
and I don't go to. I live on the very northern end of Chicago, which is basically a suburb, and I don't go to the center part of the city, like Millennium Park and such, super
Hmm.
often. But whenever I'm there, you do really get this feeling of like, wow, there's a lot of people here.
Yeah,
um, and
same thing with me. I live
yeah,
way out in the northwestern portion of Philadelphia.
hmm
Like Roxborough, Manayunk, that sort of area, which
hmm
used to way back be a small town or set of small towns, and
yeah,
has only gradually been absorbed
yeah,
into the greater Philadelphia area over the course of hundreds of years.
hmm
So it's like the architecture is different here from, say, somewhere
yeah.
like it's
But
still got the
like,
whole old row housing,
yeah, the
the solid
main thing,
progression.
that I think the episode is good at portraying is like, even if you're there often, you do
Hmm.
just like sort of inherently feel like a fish out of water. And there's
Yeah.
also there's another episode with like a very interesting small character dynamic between two characters. And I don't know if you want to explain that, if you want to let me. Either works.
Like I go for it.
Right. So now and Karen, they're applying for the same position. This like weird middle schooler idol thing. Um, and now keeps getting farther and farther in the auditions, despite the fact that she doesn't like she's not really very committed to this whole thing. Karen, on the other hand, really wants it, but she's not getting like nearly as far as now is. And in a different kind of series, in fact, this is sort of kind of what Kageki Shoujo is about, which is a show that just ended
Mm.
earlier this year, or not even earlier this year, like a couple days ago, as of the time that we're recording this. In a different kind of series, they would use that as like a setup for drama,
Hmm.
but instead, there's just this kind of not even tension, but a unspoken kind of I don't even know what word I would use, like resignation that the people who try the hardest are not always the ones who get the thing,
Hmm.
even if they really want it. And neither character resents the other, but they do both sort of wish they could be in each other's place.
Yeah.
It's very
It,
interesting.
yeah, it's like the whole reaction, like when Nao says, well, no, when Karin says to Nao, is that she says, basically, I really want, if, even if it were purely from luck or chance,
Hmm
I would, I would take your place in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
And yet she doesn't say it in a way that's like angry. It's that she's just deeply hurt by the world. It's not
yeah,
Nao's fault
yeah.
that she's in this position.
There
It's
is like this sense of just like I don't want to say fatalism, but almost like a and that's how it is ness,
Yeah.
which is a phrase that I just made up now.
Uh there is an expression in Japanese which, god, it's escaping me, which is a really common stock phrase,
mm,
which is escaping me. And it's but basically it is what it is. It's
yeah,
like that's just the way things are, in a way. It's like
yeah.
that there is an expression of accepting when things go badly, that, well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, and the only thing you can do, and this is like sort of the positive resolution to the episode, the only thing you can do is push on,
Hmm.
and she does, Karen does, and it's not directly stated, but it seems like she gets the next
Yeah.
thing she's applying for.
And there is a wonderful moment at the very, very end with Nao taking Karin's photograph,
From the
using the wind
rooftop, yeah.
to get her to turn around,
Mm-hmm.
and it just gets this perfect shot of her
Yeah.
that captures exactly who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a wonderful scene. It also does the Dazaki postcard thing, which makes sense because guess what? The background art director, Shichiro Kobayashi, worked on Gamba no Boken and a bunch of other Dazaki stuff.
Hmm.
So it's like,
Continuity.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, oh, this makes so much sense. And it's like, we'll talk about this later, but there are like a shocking number of super talented people who are not
Um,
super well known who
hold
worked
that
on
thought.
this.
I
Oh,
think
sure.
I think Streamlabs just crashed.
Oh, no.
Okay, and we're back. Thank God that uh, our recording program has a run out feature. Um, you were talking about the backgrounds in
Yes.
the modeling episode.
Yeah, like the thing is, like, well, just in general, that, the art direction is handled by uh like a guy, Shichiro Kobayashi,
Mm-hmm.
who back in the day worked with Osamu Dezaki quite a bit, and is very prolific, and sort of explains like the occasional use of the Dezaki postcard, for example, at the very end of the
Yeah.
modeling episode. Um, but also just in general. And I think part of it is it being, like a production IG show of a very particular period when they were kind of on a hot streak, is that there are a lot of people who aren't like super well known, but are very talented people in the industry who are working on this project. Like, I brought up like Masatsugu Arakawa, who he's mainly sort of like a storyboards and key animation guy. Um and but it's like you can really sort of, there are specific things that he's worked on where you definitely like
Mm-hmm.
know that this is a guy with a very peculiar kind of vision going on.
Yeah.
um
Like on that note, we can talk about the art style briefly if you like.
yeah.
That's a related subject we could get into briefly before
Oh yeah.
I talk about my favorite episode.
Oh sure, yeah.
Yeah, the art is. I mean, you can see from the poster. It doesn't look like many other anime. Um, I
There.
am not somebody who is inclined to give a show points just for being different. I think it also has to look good. And Windy Tales does, like, the art style does look good in motion. Most of the time, there's occasionally moments where it's like it looks a little bit wonky, but for the most part,
Yeah.
I actually think that the show's aesthetic, like it basically nails it.
Yeah, like as I said before, it's like it's really good at, shifting into the more abstract elements or into something
Yeah,
like, that those sort of like very striking sort of pastel frame kind of, held moments just
mm-hmm.
completely naturally. And
Yeah,
even when it goes out of its way to do something really wild, like in the episode with the premonitions, uh
yeah,
like there's that whole bit where of Miki's premonition, which is like very strange and really wild and expressionistic, but it feels entirely in keeping with the
yeah.
show's vibe.
It's not a very showy show visually. Which
Yeah,
boy, what a phrase! But like
yeah.
it 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 doesn't ever feel like it's like beating you over the head with how artistic it is.
Hmm.
Which it's not something that happens super often, but occasionally I'll look at clips from certain anime which will go unnamed in this episode, and I'll be like, you know, I get it. But This one, it does feel very like it feels purposeful, and it feels like
Hmm.
it meshes with the
Yes.
general feel of the show very well. Um, so I wanted to briefly talk about the kick the can episode, which
Yes.
is my favorite episode. The episode, the story of the episode is very simple. It's the main girls run across a group of elementary students who are playing kick the can in a building at night, an under construction building. Um, and these elementary school kids are also wind manipulators. And the show does an interesting thing where, like, how they got those powers is never directly addressed, but their control of them correlates to whether or not they can keep playing this kick the can game, which in turn is kind of a like I sort of struggled for a way to describe this when we first watched the episode, and I still kind of am. Um, it's almost like a metaphor for innocence or something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, in a way, more for like the. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss
It's
for
a
words
very
myself.
fiddly concept. It's hard to nail down. Like, there's this whole thing about like, um, the kids go to a cram school, so they can only play with each other at night. Um,
Hmm.
and when this building that's under construction that they've been running around in, and our main characters also at one point join them for a game, that eventually gets boarded up. They lose their powers and also most of their reason to hang out together. So it's sort of, I guess I would say, like a symbol of things you end up needing to put aside as you become older, but in a less like dramatic fashion than that would imply. It's a
Yeah.
very nuanced symbol, and it's
Mm.
hard to get across without actually watching the episode, which I realize is a little bit of a cop out, but it's definitely the episode I've thought about the most of the series. Um, and I just love how it looks too. Like, there's not really
Hmm.
too many night scenes in the show, but the ones that are there, the bulk of which are in that episode, are really, really pretty.
Hmm. The way that they convey light within darkness
Yeah,
using sort of cross hatching techniques
yeah,
is really striking. There's very much a sketchiness to the show, which
mm-hmm.
is parallel to like two things. One is another show that like so one thing that I had like I was struggling to find examples of like with Arakawa of examples of like stuff like this that he had worked on, and it was like and then I realized, oh yeah, he worked on like 10 Shinchan movies, and it's like that style of animation.
Like Crayon Shinchan.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I can.
Yeah,
It
like that.
it the character models look very different, so it's not immediately obvious.
Yeah,
But yeah,
but
I can see it.
the yeah, it's sort of that was also the sort of arena that Masaki Yuasa came up in, and
Okay.
he's very much known for that wonky sort of like non-modeled kind of thing. And actually the other example that I thought of, which is another show which is in turn wildly different from the other two, is one of I think the first series that Yuasa directed, Kemonozume, which
Okay.
also does the whole it looks like it came out of a sketchbook and is walking
Yeah.
around thing.
The what I was gonna mention is like and this is another term that I probably overuse, but the night scenes have sort of a like a liminal look to them that I think is
Hmm.
really
Yeah.
it like any honestly like it's sort of just a thing I'm a sucker for is like anytime an anime is like, hey, here's a whole episode that takes place in the middle of the night. I'm like,
Hmm.
hell yeah.
Yeah.
I
Oh, same.
realize that's probably not quite as insightful to our listener base as you drawing lines down different artistic lineages, which is like both true and not something people would immediately notice, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Nonetheless, it is also true.
Yeah.
It's true and good. Um, it's true and good.
Yeah, there's a few other moments throughout the show, like not whole episodes, but like you already mentioned there's an episode where a boy takes care of a flying squirrel, and there's that bit at
Oh
the
yes.
end
Yeah.
where
Uh, Oh
go on.
yeah, where June, like he just in seeing like they have to return the flying squirrel to its keeper, who is an old lady,
Mm-hmm.
who is and in the meantime, June has taught this pet animal who was probably like rescued as a baby, so does not know how to glide,
Uh huh.
and then as
Oh,
they're
pardon me.
as the lady is walking away in her little flying squirrel carrier, which is such a strange thing, this dongori, which is what he names the flying squirrel, which means acorn, uh
Yeah.
like is watching him, and he opens his shirt, throws like a towel or something out, like a cape, and then
Yes.
waves it. And it's like, because that's
It's
how he
adorable.
taught him to fly. And the flying squirrel looks up and does the same thing back, and it is the
It
cutest
is
thing
it is
ever.
extremely precious. And
And
then on
it's
like
like,
the total other end of the emotional spectrum, there's the bit in the episode where the dad gets a motorcycle,
oh yeah.
um, and he gets into a bike crash. We don't see the crash firsthand,
Hmm.
but later, after he is recovered and he gets out of the hospital,
Yeah.
um,
Nao's father
now
for
his father,
clarity.
yes, he goes back to the place where he had this bike crash, and he looks at the mark that it left on the safety rail, and he's basically just like, "Huh, I almost actually died." He
Yeah,
he
like he
seems
said.
very
Yeah, it's not, it's like that whole, the way that sometimes you sometimes see this, and I'll admit that this is getting very personal, but I'm not going to get like too into detail, is that
mm-hmm.
sometimes when I talk about sort of traumatic experiences that I've had, you kind of are able to sometimes step back from that thing, but you're at the same time going like, as he's looking at this place where his helmet got destroyed from hitting this
Yeah.
rail, and he's like, you know, well, and I was like, I was so surprised, that like as the motorcycle slid, it actually made sparks. And I was like, and he has this perfect clarity with it, and it's like,
Yeah, he's
well,
describing it in like perfect detail and
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 well,
everything.
yeah, but not like in a super anxious or horrified way, just like almost a curious way, because
Yeah.
it's like something that happened to somebody else that you perfectly remember.
Yeah, which I think going back to what we said earlier,
Oh
all
yeah,
of
like
this kind of ties into this theme of like things are what they are and you need to kind of accept them.
but also to like the thing with Makino telling the story about the Malacca Straits, and like that whole evoking something that may not have happened to you personally,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
that's
in
an
a way,
example. Yeah,
it
that's an example of
becomes a
the
part
show
of you.
doing it. Yeah,
Yeah, it becomes a part of you
yeah,
in a way. It's like the layers of that. And there's like a lot of that
which is
just kind
really
of
interesting. Yeah,
woven into the show throughout.
yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, and also like they just I'm at a loss for words. I really like this show, but sometimes it makes me go in a way
It's
that I don't have good words for.
it's a very and we can get into this too because it's not quite a criticism of the show, at least not from my point of view. There are parts of it where I do kind of cock my head to the side and I'm like um like there's a pretty good episode about an old woman and a cherry blossom tree.
Yeah, the second to last episode,
Yeah, the second to
the
last
the
episode.
flower viewing episode, and there is an there's a really excellent kind of through line with a poem which I do not know the author of. I have been
Yeah,
meaning to look
I
that
I
up.
actually don't know. Like I don't know how to look it up. Really, if that's an
It's
actual poem, I assume it
I
is. It seems
Yeah,
like one,
it's
but
one that is, I believe it's one that's well known enough
yeah,
that referencing it there, because like Hanami, related poems are like a whole genre, especially in like older classical Japanese
yeah.
poetry.
Which what I was going to bring up is like that's a good episode, but there is kind of, and I said this to you last night. I think if you wanted to, you could make the case that the show is kind of conservative, not in a political sense, but in like a how would you put it, like a
I you
family
know,
values kind of sense almost.
well, not in like the family values sense that we would understand it, but more
Yeah,
like it is distinctly, it has a very not traditionalist but traditional thing going on in
yeah,
places,
that's a good way to put it.
like for example, it like in the fact that there isn't really, there's very little in terms of like what you would call like religious symbolism in terms of the show, but what is there is more Shinto than Buddhist, which is
Yeah,
kind of unusual. Like you don't see a lot of
yeah,
like straight evocation of like old Shinto in
yeah,
Japanese
and there's
popular
like
media.
on another level, there's not really any like romance, even subtextually, between any of the characters, except for uh, June and what's Twin
And
Girl
Miki,
Miki. Thank you. I always
um,
forget Pigtail Girl's name. Um, which I mean, it's it's not a problem at all. It's just something the show doesn't do, which
it's
I don't
yeah.
think that it would be fair to call that a shortcoming, but it is something where if somebody wanted those things and the show didn't provide them, I would understand, even if I do think it's a
Mm,
little unfair. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah, like I mean, we were joking about the whole thing of that, like, you know, as like, two queer trans people. That is like,
Yes.
if if you like, you can try to lock your Yuri goggles or queer reading goggles on, and it's like there's not
There's
even that
nothing.
much het
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, it's just
Like
like
it's just
which like on one like I want to be clear, on one level, of course there's not. They're middle schoolers.
yeah, it's
But
like
on
aside
another
yeah.
level,
Eh,
like it's a work of fiction, so I don't think that it's unreasonable to at least think about that as a possibility.
but it's also on the other hand, it's like it's also in many ways, because it is not the point, it just very little in
Yeah,
that way comes up,
it's
because and where
again
it
like
does is about the characters.
yeah,
It is
again
not, yeah, like it's, for example, Miki and Jun's relationship says
Mm-hmm.
a lot about them
Yes.
and figuring themselves out as people. And especially, as we said earlier, Taiki and Yukio's non-relationship says a
Yeah.
lot about them as people in very little time.
Yeah. It's
Um,
again, like, I don't think it's really fair to call it a flaw or a
oh
shortcoming.
no,
It's
not at all.
just a
If
thing
you
to
are
know, I guess. You know,
if you are looking for
for
the
that, not
for
here.
that,
Yeah.
like it will not quench your thirst.
Yeah, no, there's
It-
there's many other anime that you could watch for that.
yes, yeah. Whereas this is more like a refreshing spring breeze
Yeah,
for your iyashikei needs.
yeah. I mean, again, like I always hesitate to play devil's advocate even a little bit because I do feel that like that's something I had to deliberately think about as like, would you call that a problem or not? And I don't think you would. I think some people might, but I don't think that I'd be totally on board with that.
Mm,
um again, it's not really a shortcoming, it's just something the show doesn't do. uh
yeah.
but I mean, like again, I overall I do really like the series. It it does make me wonder. There is a show that is in premise rather similar to this that came out a year after this. Wendy Tales is from, I believe, 2004. The other
Yeah.
show, Kamichu, is from 2005. I have not
Yeah.
seen Kamichu in a long time, so I do wonder how the two compare and contrast in that
Hmm.
regard. I would like to
That
eventually cover Kamichu on our
and
program too. I'm just
it's
not sure when.
it's the reverse of the situation with myself and Windy Tales, where I saw this a while back and was rewatching it,
Yeah,
and Jane had never seen it,
yeah.
so we'll be
Yeah, we'll be
doing
doing
the
the
reverse.
opposite. Yeah, because I
And it's
I've
yeah.
I've seen Kamichu, but it's been years. That was one of the very first anime I ever sought out of my own accord. Like, it was Azumanga Daioh, Serial Experiments Lane, and that, I
Mm.
think, maybe literally in order. So it was pretty early on in my journey through the medium. Um, I just think that that's interesting that two shows with this sort of similar conceit came out so close to each other.
Um,
I wonder, like, what was in the air, in the
hmm.
mid 2000s there.
I did realize that there is one tiny instance of you know, odd gender stuff, but it's so subtle and minor that it's like
Oh well, I
it,
mean, I'd be interested to hear
it
regardless.
is of all things with the wind cat, the central cat,
Oh
which
yeah,
is is a calico cat that is male, which is very very
yeah,
rare. And that's also kind of playing into the fact that like calico cats have a very distinctive place in Japanese culture. It's associated
that's
especially
interesting.
with like bakeneko and things.
I honestly did not know that.
Yeah, it's yeah, like, and then like the calico gene is generally only communicated through two X chromosomes. So technically the wind cat is on the intersex spectrum.
Yeah, hey, there you go.
Intersex rep, the only intersex rep of note in most anime,
uh,
and
but
it's the cat. Oh my
yeah,
god.
I mean, like honestly, it is a show where, at the beginning of the episode I said it's almost too subtle for its own good. And what I just mean by that is that it like, other than the stuff that we've mentioned, it's sort of hard to discuss the show's
Hmm.
merits because they're all so subtle. Like,
Uh-huh.
I
Oh,
do, like, I feel like I almost feel like I'm gonna give people the impression that I'm, like, protesting too much. I do legitimately quite like this series. It's just, you know, when you tell somebody why you like something, it's hard to make,
yeah.
well, it's a character study with a central theme about how all things must pass sound
Yeah,
catchy. Like,
like
you know.
how do you sell people on, you know, it's Mono no Aware, the
The show,
series.
yeah. Actually,
Uh
we can kind of talk about. I think that has something to do with why this isn't remembered super well. So if you want to get to that portion of our show a little bit early, I think we can.
sure. I did want to quickly say also
Okay.
related to the cats, the whole thing of the implication that cats just have wind powers is kind of great.
Yeah, that's really
There's
funny. Like,
like
just
that
very
feral
good.
cats just know how to control wind and nobody notices.
Hmm. Yeah.
Unless you have you just have seen the right context clues, and and that really leans more into the magical realist aspect, is like just the like Ryoko just rolling with that, because
Yeah.
again, Ryoko, we haven't talked much about her,
We should.
is
Yeah. Okay. That's one more thing we can get
she
to.
is this very quiet, sensitive, odd girl
Yeah.
who, she has kind of a thing for Taiki Sensei, and is the first one to develop wind powers, and she's
Yeah.
like just totally unfazed when it turns out other people can. And it's like, oh, you did too. And she's like the first to have like some weird premonition stuff in the typhoon episode, which is also the and in the snow episode.
Hmm.
Um and she just kind of like, she's she also provides one of the funniest scenes, is like when they go to a horror movie, and it's
Yes.
just, and her reactions are amazing.
Yeah. I wish I had saved that screen cap so I could
Oh,
pop it up
I
on
have the
screen.
screen cap. I have it.
I'll like post it in the description of the video or something.
Oh yes, because it's so
It's
good.
just a very very good face.
But she just kind of like rolls with basically everything,
Yeah.
and it's great.
She is. I do wish the show had done a little bit more with her.
Yeah,
She's
she
not the focus of most episodes.
and she kind of disappears in a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
Like,
It.
but she appears in a lot of the most important ones.
Yeah. She is a very interesting character who I like a lot.
Yes.
She's
And
probably
yeah.
the one we learn the least about. Would you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like we know more about her internal life than her external life, which is
Yeah.
interesting. But even then, she's kind of an enigma, and that's
Hmm.
kind of, she has like, specifically, she has very much the vibe of like, if there is any trope being played to of like the old school shrine maiden kind of character,
Hmm. Yeah, I
like
could see that.
very like, person what talks to the spirits, like
Yeah.
she gives, this girl sees ghosts energy.
Yeah. It's great.
it's
She's
it
wonderful.
I have met people like her, and they're fun.
I wish I could project that kind of like I
And that kind of
that
energy.
level of mysteriousness. That's got to be
Yeah.
great.
And it's and also definitely like definitely not neurotypical.
That too. Yeah.
Yeah, but and also, oh, the other thing I wanted to mention about the cats is, in the episode where they're preparing for a typhoon, um the the cats form a giant cat orb, which in terms of dramatic, there are some very dramatic visuals, but they're always like, they're undersold in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, oh, isn't nature amazing? But nature
The
is like this supernatural.
I let me tell you something. There is a school of like generally they come out in the summer
Hmm.
anime films where stuff like that would be like the big showy centerpiece.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I do really like Windy Tales as it is. I would be interested to see the version of Windy Tales that is one of those movies.
that would be interesting. It
I
feels
uh,
like
I
it,
said this to you last night. I said as much as I do like it, it remains in in second place behind Weathering with You as far as like um magical realist anime that relate to the weather somehow.
Yeah, it is definitely like it is a show that like really likes to like it is not throwing the fastball at you, it's going for the slow pitch,
Yeah,
you know?
that's a
Like,
very good way to put that, Julian.
thank you. It's like
But
it
yeah, that is
that
exactly how I'd describe it.
and it's like yeah, there's and but yeah, like there's occasionally and often it is related to cats, which is like a whole thing.
Yeah.
And like specifically like when all the cats sort of band together to protect
Hmm.
themselves and form this giant sphere of cats, this
Yes.
giant egg-shaped object floating that slowly disintegrates as the sun comes out and the cats go home.
A
And
mysterious object.
indeed, um, I
I'm
used the
sorry.
word. I also used the term maelstrom uh, on several occasions when watching
We're
this.
fucking terrible. We are horrible
I
people.
I mean, that's the only way to describe like there's
Okay.
like a hurricane of cats at one point.
I do want to move on. We've got about 30 minutes, 25 minutes left. I do
Don't
want
talk
to,
about the inside baseball of podcasting.
yeah,
It's
no.
against the law.
But like, I do want to talk about the, like why people don't remember this one quite as
Oh
much.
yeah.
And Windy Tales is not the most obscure thing we've covered, and certainly it's not the most obscure thing we will cover. I think it's probably right around like the level of Andy at the Town Moves, maybe a little bit more obscure.
Yeah, it's a bit more obscure, I would say.
And I think like there's two things. One is the fact that it is so low key makes it a bit of a hard sell. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that has probably not helped with its longevity. The other thing though, I think that if this had come out like 10 years later, it would be remembered more because this is a personal pet peeve of mine, but it's in some ways good for the shows. It would get filed into the cute girls doing cute things like pseudo
Hmm.
genre,
Yeah.
and it would people would go into it with that expectation, and I think they would have their expectations exceeded, and I think that would have built up maybe a bit more of a loyal cult following. Um, which I mean, the show does have a cult following, just not quite
It's a
on the level of some other things.
it's a very yeah, it has like definitely has its supporters, many of whom came to it like later.
Yeah,
Like for
this I
example, one of the most prominent
mhm.
reviews I can find of it is at the site I kind of work for, which by my colleague Nicoletta Christina Brown on them animated reviews, um, which you know like she wrote this in like 2015,
Yeah,
which is like like partly it was because it became licensed well after the fact. It like took I think over a decade for it to get
yeah.
licensed.
This one had a really weird. I was looking at the Wikipedia article yesterday, and I don't have it in front of me, so apologies if I get any of these details wrong. But
Hmm.
like, it had a very strange journey coming to the rest
Yeah.
of the world. Like, it was. I think I read it was like on the Animax channel at one point. There's a
Hmm.
dub of
Yeah.
this. I don't know where you can watch the dub anymore,
Yeah.
or if it's any
It's
good or not. I have no idea.
yeah. It was licensed by Sentai,
Sentai, yes.
who do not do a lot of dubs, is the thing,
Yeah,
and
just a
they're
very odd history the show has had.
yeah. I wonder who translated the dub because the thing is that there's like a whole there's a whole story behind that. We'll get into it sometime with something that has a Sentai dub that we've actually seen a little of.
Yeah.
But of I believe it's Stephen Foster, is it? Who did a lot of the
You
translation
know,
and localization.
I do want to quickly correct. I just tabbed over to the ANN page, and that says
Mhm.
that there is no English dub. So you know what?
Huh.
I don't know.
That is peculiar.
Like it's just
Um,
English cast, none. I don't know.
unless it is entirely possible it was planned and never released.
That
That
could be, but
there's a similar case
we're
with that with the similarly low profile but slightly larger cult following Mononoke, where the show it was based on briefly was that it spun off from had an English dub,
huh
uh, but is actually less well known than Mononoke is now.
huh
Um, but yeah, also an aside that I was not aware of, but in terms of, so the thing is, it's almost impossible to find out information about the person who actually was the creator behind Windy
yeah.
Tales.
We
That's
looked. This
yeah, like
this person is a question mark.
so. Yeah, like as I said, Masatsugu Arakawa had like a really strong hand in the visual presentation and
Yeah,
stuff. But the person who created it is a young woman named Minami Otori. Uh, and she doesn't have any other anime credits, but apparently she was the winner of a first anime planning contest, which implies that she might have been herself a teenager.
yeah. Like we, and to give you an idea of what Julian had to do to get that information, we had to run Windy Tail's Japanese Wikipedia page through a translator. There
And
is
fiddling
zero English language information on this woman.
Yeah, it's very yeah, I mean, it's also worth noting that it's kind of like a neat thing which isn't as common in like in a lot of anime, is that the people who actually played the teenage protagonists were themselves teenagers.
Yeah,
Um
some of
like
them have gone on to do other stuff. Some of them haven't really.
Yeah, or they have like more limited careers that are like more in other, or they're in just
Yeah,
different things, like
yeah. Sorry,
uh
I meant
like
specifically with regard to anime.
with
Apologies.
regard to, because like a lot of them are still actors or
Yeah,
voice actors, but they are like not as much in anime and more in video games, or they do like, at least one of them actually I think does television acting. The Nao's voice actress has had a very prolific career. Um, like she's done a lot, sh- um, in just all kinds of different shows. Um,
was she
like
the one? Because I know we were looking at this last night. Is she the one who later played Nonali in Code Geass, or was that a different
yep,
person?
that's
Okay,
her.
yeah.
She
So
is.
there's a there's a fun fact for you. The girl in the
Oh yeah.
center of the poster here, and Nonali from Code Geass, same person
Oh, and
behind the
there are
screen.
even weirder ones, because it's like, oh god, I I am sorry for being so disorganized this time around.
Ah, no, we both are. It's
But
listen. It's a disorganized podcast. It's fine.
um she has also played Mount Lady in My Hero
All
Academia,
right. Well,
which is wild.
I'm
She
not.
was
I'm going to
she
just
was
decline to say what I think of that show, and we'll
yeah,
move on to the next credit.
like, and just like a bunch of people in Detroit Metal City.
Huh.
Um she
Possible
is
future candidate for this show.
yeah, and just like Kyoko in Haikyuu,
Okay.
just an
Yeah.
absolutely huge number of roles. June actually, like the actor who played June, um, went on to have a pretty decent singing career.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he was like 16 when he did this show.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
this
and
does seem like a show, and I can't
oh, and he
I
got
can't.
married like this month. So
Oh,
good
good for
for
him.
him.
This does seem like a show, and I can't prove this. Like, I don't have the data in front of me. It does seem like a series that was a bigger deal domestically than abroad.
Yeah, like just as
Like,
like
you
yeah,
get
it's
those sometimes, shows that are a much bigger deal in Japan than they are elsewhere.
yeah, it's like a kind of thing that's, like a notable early thing in a
Well,
bunch of people's careers who
it
did other stuff.
the inanity of what I just said just occurred to me. Obviously, that's true of like lots of things, but I mean, with like anime after the late '90s or so specifically, there are some where
Oh yeah,
the gulf between how popular they are in Japan and how relatively unknown they are elsewhere is notable. That's what I mean.
indeed. Yeah, it's just they're like there are a bunch of people here who, like have, like they have some interesting credits going on there. Like of all things, Yoko appeared as a a side character in Digimon Tamers at one point. I
Huh.
think before this. I think like Tamers is from what, 2003?
I do not remember when Tamers came out.
Yeah, like so there's just like yeah, there's much to talk about with that, but that's like really digging into like
Yeah,
I could be here all week if I
yeah.
started
It's. I
getting into
mean,
like Atsushi Wakabayashi worked on this,
yeah.
like
Like
it's
the people
yeah.
who worked on this show went on to do a plurality of different things. It's not
Oh yeah.
like not like the last show where we covered where
Just
it's like a low point in anybody's work
oh yeah.
history. It's
Yeah.
this was a
It's like
notable step along the way for many people.
oh also thing that I forgot to mention way earlier was Mamoru Oshii supervised
Did I just
this.
say last episode, which was definitely not a week ago?
But yeah, like but like it's again, it's like with the whole weird thing of it, like just how many people here who are like not necessarily, like the exception in terms of known rather names is as I said, like it was supervised by Mamoru Oshii, like Pat Labor, Ghost in the Shell, like
Yeah, that's
dude's a really big deal.
that guy has had an interesting career. I would
And
not
the
be.
yeah.
He's got to have some like weird thing that nobody's ever seen that we can cover on here sometime.
Oh, definitely. And the music was by Kenji Kawai, who's done like a bazillion things. And it's good music. It's like
Yeah,
it's got like a relatively limited pool of different tracks they're working from, but they're all used
yeah.
very well.
I on that note, we can pivot a little bit into talking about like other reviews of this. I
There are very few.
There's not very many. I saw a review on Analyst of this show. I'm not going to put this person on blast because they clearly enjoyed the show and put like a fair amount of effort into their review. But
Hmm.
they did criticize it for having repetitive music, which is kind of a strange complaint to me.
Yeah, it's sort of like how like if you look at an interesting example of this would be the second Hunter x Hunter adaptation,
Mm-hmm.
which is like you could argue that the music gets repetitive over the course of 148 episodes,
Yeah,
which
but
is long, but also there are like 2.5 hours of music for this show,
and
you
it's
know.
only like 6 hours long, so I don't know. I feel like that's decent variety,
Yeah,
but
exactly. It's the same
it's
kind of
not it's not recreators. I'll tell you that.
yeah, and it's not like in terms of a thing we will one day cover, which I gush about constantly, is Alien 9, where it's like where the soundtrack album is about as long as the show. that that has very varied music. We'll get to that.
Yeah,
We'll get to it.
yeah. No, that's on that's on the definitely list. But
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there was another review I saw. Anime News Network reviewed it once as part of their what's it called, Shelf Life series,
Mm-hmm.
where they rated it a shelf worthy, which is the
Mm-hmm.
highest grade you can get in that column. And
Mm-hmm.
the guy reviewing it, something Jensen, Paul Jensen. He said honestly like many of the same things we did. Um, it's you know the people who have seen the show seem to like it. It's one of those things where it's, as I've been saying, a little bit of a hard sell because its strengths are so low key.
Mm-hmm. It's also, it's just like part of it is that it's a kind of show that does not take off here very much.
No, I think about iyashikei shows that people know. Like I think I mentioned Flying Witch briefly, and that show has a following, but even that is like it's not
Mhm.
super well
or
known.
or like Aria, where
Yeah,
there's
Aria
a
is like an older one. That's
like
probably
yeah,
the most well known iyashikei.
and it's also, it has like a huge quiet following that
Yeah,
only comes out of hibernation every like years when another Aria thing
yeah,
happens,
no,
and
like
they're just like,
Aria fans are like cicadas.
yeah, they come out, they say, based, and go back to sleep.
uh,
It's just like they enjoy it like a hot cup of green tea and then go back to
yeah,
sleep.
I've never gotten a chance to talk about this like on record. I'm a huge fan of Record of Yokohama Shopping Trip, which
Yeah,
is a
that's another
manga
one.
that is
Yeah.
also decently well known.
Mhm.
But like the qualifier for all of these is like you'll have heard of them if you know what an iyashikei is. Like even Super
Yeah.
Cub, which I brought up earlier and only just ended
Oh
last
man.
season, that's
Like,
still like you have to be interested in
hmm
the idea of watching a show to relax, basically,
yeah, like
which is a
I
thing that I think is foreign to a lot of people over
yeah,
here.
like I yeah, again, like a reason why
Like
a lot of these
relax,
things are
relax.
on my radar is because one of the regular reviewers for them is Stig Hogset, who is like one of the few like English language people, and he's from like, God, was it Norway, I believe?
Hmm.
And he like who like is a huge fan of the Ashike series, and it's like
Live your truth,
this,
bud.
that's what.
I said, live your truth, bud.
Yeah, yeah. But so like a lot of this stuff is on his radar, and it's like I've become aware of a lot of this stuff, but it's like that's being plugged into a very particular niche.
Yeah,
Like
it's
the kind of person who watches that kind of show is like, it's very specific.
yeah, like, and then I almost feel like Windy Tales is then like another subset below that where it's
Oh yeah.
uh like I don't want to distinguish it from other Iyashikei too much because like the ones that we've mentioned, a lot of them do have more contemplative elements, but with
Mhm.
Windy Tales, the whole like impermanence of things theme is a really big part of it.
Mhm.
So you're kind of looking at a niche within a niche almost.
it's it is, again, it's like yeah, I joked, but I was also being completely serious when I said in the flower viewing episode that at one point, now once again is in the nurse's office, and Taiki is there, and he recites this old Japanese poem which he doesn't perfectly remember.
Mm-hmm.
When discussing, she asks why, like when there is bad weather, sometimes that, like as wind manipulators, why don't we clear the sky? Why? And then he, says, he starts reciting a poem, talking about like, do we only appreciate flowers when they are in bloom? Do we only
Mm.
appreciate the moon when it is full? No, we appreciate when the clouds have obscured the moon and a garden of wilted flowers, and basically talking about their transience. And that's
Yeah,
like a
I
whole
really
thing.
liked that moment.
Yeah, that there's a whole thing about like that's the point of hanami, of usually viewing of sakura
Yeah,
blossoms, of cherry blossoms in the spring, is that it is about it's about recognizing the beauty in something that is so impermanent.
Hmm.
uh and and the whole sort of plot there with the older woman who, that like the tree that she, had a rendezvous with, a guy years upon years ago, you know like who she was in love with briefly, has, mostly had most it had its branches cut off. While
Hmm.
it is still alive, it's, very isolated on this city street.
Yeah, when
And
we see it, it's like uh, off of a sidewalk, and most of its branches have been pruned. It's
yeah,
basically
probably
just a
due to
log.
illness. Yeah, probably due to illness, but it has one blooming branch
Yeah.
left. And that sort of, and then they bring her to see the cherry blossoms outside of their school, and Taiki raises the wind for them.
Yeah.
And it's just, and then the poem is completed because they also include at the end the preface to the poem, which is very important, which is a, talking about the like that sort of the nature of that kind of appreciation. And it's like just kind of a little circular thing, um
Hmm.
completing both halves of that story. And that it's like, if that sounds like something you would appreciate, you should watch this
Yeah.
show.
Honestly, I feel like the poem kind of reflects the nature of the show itself, which
Hmm.
I realize that's a very hoity-toity thing to say, but
Eh.
it's like, yeah, you know, that's the point. It's like, to make you appreciate things that are maybe not necessarily going to be here tomorrow. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's, like, I can say all I've said, and I do stand by it, but I think that's a lovely point for a series to have. I
Hmm.
mean, yeah, it's just like a very amicable show. Like, I don't know, it's
Yeah.
kind of a weird way to put it, I guess, but like,
It's like, yeah, it's sort of like, and this came to mind, is like the inciting incident of the snow episode is of there is a little thing that Nao experiences, which is kind of strange, but there's also, Yoko talks about having had a daydream or a hallucination of herself being in bed asleep in her
yeah.
pajamas, in the mirror when she's awake and looking into her mirror
Hmm.
in the morning. And then the ending of that, the loop, is that during the day of this huge snowstorm, and snow, of course, being another beautiful impermanent thing,
Hmm.
that, and it's like, and in many ways a very powerful force, like, that can clog up traffic real fast. But it's like, but it's also the sort of wonder of that when you're a kid going out into the snow. But with Ryoko, she's just in bed enjoying being asleep and
Yeah.
warm, and
It's
that's what she saw of herself. And
yeah.
that's the show in a nutshell.
Yeah. It's like, it's the sort of thing, like, I can't imagine anybody disliking this show. Like, I mean, statistically speaking, I'm sure someone does. There's a lot of people in the world. But like,
I don't think
it's
I've in retrospect, I don't think I've ever met someone who's seen it who's disliked it.
yeah, me
Yeah.
neither. Like, it's, people will like it to different degrees, but
Hmm.
it's such a simple, universal thing that
Yeah.
I really don't think that anyone could not like it. To
Yeah.
at least like a little bit, like, you have to
Yeah.
at least
Like,
respect it. I feel like,
yeah, I do feel like, again, it's one of those things where it will probably not be personally for you if you are not somebody who vibes with things that are very slow paced,
that's a good point.
don't have a lot of like plot, even when they have a fair amount of story.
Yeah.
um and again, like the whole high concept low concept thing, there really isn't a good elevator pitch for this show.
Yeah, I mean that's like the one thing.
It's like you can
We
describe the basics, but that doesn't really encompass the point.
Yeah. We should wrap things up here, I think,
Yeah,
because we are
that's reasonable.
at our time limit, and also Streamlabs just crashed again. So.
Oh wow! Oh boy!
That's
Well,
cool. Like I mean, now I know that
I didn't.
it does that, but
I
that's
didn't even
very
get
silly.
to say. I didn't even get to say that the ending theme is a bop.
Oh, the ending theme's amazing. No, I mean we can keep talking. Like the actual recorder is still going, but the front end crashed. But like
Yeah.
why don't we tell people what we're doing next month? Because what we're doing
Oh.
next month is in many ways the complete opposite of this show.
Oh boy.
Uh,
We're gonna be reviewing an edgy boy.
no, an edgy girl.
An edgy girl.
So
Yes.
next episode
Gender
of
neutral
KeyFrames,
use of boy there.
the next episode of KeyFrames Forgotten, we're going to be taking a look at what a lot of people wrote off, I would say, as the very first Madoka Magica clone. We are going to be looking at Daybreak Illusion,
Oh boy.
which is a show that I like a lot that most people think is trash. So that'll be a fun episode.
I I I
You've
I
never
am
seen it.
I am optimistic, but I also have no specific expectations.
Yeah.
I'm just interested.
Yeah.
Um,
So
because
we
like
will
I've
yeah.
never seen it.
Yeah, we will see you guys then. What else? Do we have any other final things to note? Oh, tell your friends. If you think that we have a good podcast running here, ramshackle as it sometimes is, tell people about the show. Because the only way we can get more listeners is if more people know about it. That's all I
Yeah.
ask. Hey, it didn't crash. It worked itself out. Look at that. Cool.
Huzzah! Holy crap!
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good omen.
That's
for
a good
this
omen, yeah.
podcast.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
See you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.